Welcome to Underdog Rising with your host, Wade Posehn, where we ignite your journey from humble beginnings to greatness through inspiring tales of top executives and entrepreneurs. Welcome to Underdog Rising. In this episode, we're joined by Laura Nguyen, an award-winning marketing executive and entrepreneur with 20 years of experience leading high-performing teams for major consumer brands and B2B companies. After facing burnout, Laura took an intentional career break and now helps others do the same as a certified executive coach. She is also the author of Career Break Compass, a book to help leaders refresh and recharge through intentional time off. In this episode, Laura shares her journey as a first-generation immigrant, the challenges of being a triple minority in the corporate world, and how she redefined success beyond career milestones. She'll also dive into the strategies for avoiding burnout and how to cultivate balance and self-awareness through practical tools. Welcome, Laura. Thank you for spending your time with us today.
So glad to be here. Great to chat with you, Wayne.
It'd be really incredible just to hear your underdog story. Would you mind just walking us through a little summary of your career from sort of where you started to where you are today?
Yeah. Happy to talk about that. And I love the underdog story because the truth is, right, like there's so many of us out there that don't have the opportunity, right, to really kind of think about how do you model yourself after others. So I am from my family is actually Vietnamese immigrants. And so they're refugees that came from the Vietnam War. And so, growing up, like all of my cousins, actually, we learned English as a second language. And so when we thought about, you're going into school and you don't really know the language because predominantly your whole family speaks Vietnamese. And then you go into this new environment where really you're the only person of color in your school and in your classroom. And I think that piece of it, there was always a component of I'm not the same. And you're reminded that you're not the same. And so, going through school, there's a piece of how do I prove myself? What's my differentiator in this environment? And the reality is, how do I context switch to be able to assimilate within these new roles, right? How do I adapt myself in these new roles? And that's what you learn really early on as, a 5 or 6 year old. And so as you progress through school, you continue to kind of adapt these things where for us, it was like, we're going to have straight A's and we're going to have, we're going to be involved in as many organizations as possible and take on those leadership opportunities. And so that had always been my mode and mantra. So, fast forward and I'm in college. I go to a small college in Missouri, Truman State University, which is a wonderful school. But, because of my work that I had in high school, I went into college with essentially a free ride. So, it was tuition free as a scholarship. And I was an RA or resident advisor. So I was, in the dorms where you have people like to kind of help guide right on every floor. So I was an RA in our dorm. And so it was, looking for those types of leadership opportunities. And then, I joined a sorority and I was at the time, the only, Asian person in my sorority. And I was fortunate enough to be, elected president of my sorority my junior year and met a phenomenal group of women through that experience. But I think the key there is when I thought about it, I was not only did I come from immigrants, I was typically the first Asian that was in those spaces, first Asian woman in those spaces, and I'm gay. So if you think about that, like ultimately I'm a triple minority in that way. And so it's always been this not really fitting in dynamic of what that looks like. So when I went into my first job, right, there's all of these things that almost these masks that I was able to really wear really well into all of these settings. So when I went into my first job, the difference became I joined Fleischman Hillard, which is a global marketing communications firm. And it was a wonderful first job because what it did for me was give me a ton of exposure. And they have these groups called employee resource groups, or at the time at Fleischman, they're basically practices. They're practice groups where you work with clients who are in those practice groups. And I worked on a group called Out Front, which is like an LGBT practice group, which was mind blowing to me because I didn't feel like you could be out and be working, let alone be working for clients who were in the LGBT space. So there was that component of it. And then, obviously working across these massive global brands that I was working on, massive pharmaceutical brands like Genentech and Abbott, Royal Caribbean, and Dow AgroSciences, just a ton of different brands that were phenomenal that gave me a ton of exposure. And so I was really good at wearing those masks over and over again. And I think if I think about every role that I had really early in my career, I had been promoted numerous times, typically like, at least once, if not twice within a promotion cycle, because I believed in the hustle. Like I was working from, 6:30 in the morning, and then I'd go home and eat dinner at 6:30, and then I'd physically go back in the office at 8:30 and work until 10:30, and then go out with my friends. And so that was the life for a few years. And so, as you go through that, you continue to build all of these, unfortunately, like bad habits. And so, right. And so the underdog kind of component of that is, I think about this transition between school to college to your first job and being able to progress quickly. But for me, I was chasing something that kind of made me lose my way. And so what I hope for your listeners, right, is yes, you can take the hustle and the grind and you can have that underdog story, but don't get attached to the story and get focused on what do you want.
Wow, that is very impactful. That how you rounded that out was just very, very powerful because I think people do sort of really get focused on that hustle and that grind, right? There's a big motion nowadays of you've got to hustle, you've got to grind, you've got to put in the work. There's just negative connotations to those words though, in and of themselves, right? Hustling, grinding, there's just, it's a friction. I think there's a more streamlined process that individuals can flow going, you spoke earlier about, meditation and stuff like that. I think that's also important, sort of letting go, taking that time to be with yourself, right? And understand where you ultimately want to go because we're all like energy, we're all oscillating at different frequencies. And I think we have to take time to understand that in order to identify our path and what we're meant for in life.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're 100% right in the fact that I think often when you're thinking about a machine, we're not machines. And so when you think about machines and it's the hustle and the grind, it never shuts off, right? Like at the end of the day, it's just churning and churning and churning and churning. And that's what keeps the machine running. But like, what's the oil that you're applying to the machine? What's the maintenance that you're applying to the machine? And I talk about it in my book actually about, the check engine light on your car. Like, if there's the oil change light that comes on and it tells you, hey, you need to do something. Or the low tire pressure goes on, right? And it says, oh, you need to fill me up with some air. And then there's a check engine light that turns on. And how many of us keep driving the car even when that check engine light goes on?
Absolutely. Yes. Of them, probably the majority of us.
It's fine.
The engine's seizing,
It's not fine.
steam's coming out, and we're like, yeah, I got another couple hundred miles.
Right? And that's what we do to ourselves. We see the check engine light and we ignore it. We just keep plowing forward down the highway instead of pulling over.
And you spoke about earlier, you touched on success, right? And how can individuals define that for themselves? So from your perspective, how should young people view success in their 20s, right? Is it about hitting milestones, or is there sort of a deeper definition you encourage your clients or individuals to consider?
So you were talking about in your 20s, and it's so funny because, I think about then that I had it so figured out. That, it's, you work in these corporate jobs and you wear these like nice fancy suits and you show up in these rooms and it feels really good for your ego. And I think that's the thing is unpacking success. I think, I remember my parents would always say, we just want you to be successful. And then it pivoted to, we just want you to be happy. But I think the words successful and happy are destination words. That it's not, there's a fallacy in that, right? There's not a contentment with the today. And so when we think about how do we unpack the word, defining success for ourselves, think about it like in kind of the wheel of life, right? Of what does success look like for you when it comes to your health? What does success look like for you when it comes to love and relationships, when it comes to your family, when it comes to your career and work, when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to all of these things? Like, think about all of the aspects of your life and then define success on how does that look like in a larger picture, so that I'm not over indexing in one area and losing sight of another.
I really like how you stated the success and happy are destination words, because it's also when you look at when folks used to talk about abundance, right? And being wealthy, everyone focuses on the monetary aspect of it, which yes, great and rightfully in and of itself, that's amazing. But people should always strive to be financially successful if that's their desire. And the world runs on money, but ultimately adjust that definition over time, right? Because you don't need to have millions and billions of dollars just to enjoy your life, right? And earlier you touched on finding joy so that you can eliminate burnout. And I think people need to look at that and redefine that for themselves, right? Do you have the basic needs, food, water, shelter? Do you live a comfortable life? Obviously, there's other stressors that come into play that can sort of, impact your burnout. But then I also wanted to kind of speak on burnout because you covered it a little bit earlier. What mindset shift do you think is crucial for someone experiencing burnout to begin that recovery process?
I think there's a couple things when we think about burnout, and there's both the internal as well as the external. And so I think about it like the story of the canary in the coal mine, right? So when the canary goes into the coal mine and comes out and gets sick, do we blame the canary, or is it its environment? And so I think there's really kind of two components to that, which is recognize what is the environment that you're in, and does it give you a safe container to be able to thrive and be yourself? I think in a lot of spaces, it's so quick and so often that we go to, our boss is bad, and our bad boss is the reason why we have all of this burnout. Now, yes, there might be components or characteristics that, make it tough for you to thrive in that work environment, whether it's the entire culture, whether it's leadership, whatever it might look like. And I always think about it in two ways, which is what is your manager experiencing that's causing them to create a bad environment as well, right? So if it's happening to you, it is likely happening to them, and having empathy for that experience. The second is when you can extend the empathy toward another person. The other areas, we've got to start to extend that empathy within ourselves and have that self-compassion. And so recognizing for yourself, what are your characteristics and triggers that actually create your own burnout? Like, how do you manifest it within yourself, right? In a negative way. And so I think that becomes the other piece, is having the self-awareness of, oh, I'm a people pleaser, and it's actually causing me to not have any boundaries. And I've never said no to any projects, right? Because great work begets more work. And so, or if you want something done, give it to a busy person. Like, these are the things that we have in our mind that we have to fulfill. And so I think that becomes a component of that as well, of what are your internal blockers that is creating the burnout within yourself. And so there's both. There's the what can you do, meaning having that self-awareness. And the other component is what can you do, meaning you have more power, control, and autonomy than you think you do. I was just talking to a client about this yesterday, and she was saying to me, like, well, if they're not giving me resources, Laura, then what do I do? Or if, I said this was a problem and I continue to advocate, but they're not listening to me. So what do I do? I'm just stuck. And I said to her, are you really stuck? Because I think we have more autonomy and power over this situation and choice than we think we do. Who else can you talk to, right? To be able to advocate for what you need. What else can you do? What are the other solutions that you can bring to the table that help you solve that problem? Can you hire a contractor or an agency to help solve that problem, whatever that might be? Then if those don't work, can you find another job? Right? Like, we have more options than we think are on the table, and we tend to just feel frozen in our situation. And you can make a change. And it just means that you have to be intentional and thoughtful about it.
They always look up versus looking within themselves to identify what they can do, and there are areas of opportunity that you say go up and around. Can we talk to other individuals versus just, you know, putting more and more pressure on yourself as an individual? But you spoke about sort of, identifying those triggers or internal blockers. Are there any sort of methods or um, ways in which young folks can learn about identifying those so that they can work on them?
That's a really great question. So, a few ways when I think about practicing self awareness is there's a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Have you heard of that one, Wade?
I actually have not.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So I found actually the one of my first managers and mentors gave me this book in 2006, and it has changed my life, right? It's been 18 years. And that book has specifically changed my life. And I had actually told her about it recently, that I continue to go back to it time and time and time again. There's a practice in The Artist's Way that's called morning pages. And so what you do is the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, you grab your journal and you write 3 pages. Free flow thought, no intention. The thought process around that is there's 2 things. In Julia Cameron's book, it's about how do you kind of reignite your creativity again. I use it as a tool for self-awareness because what typically shows up on the page are things that thoughts, feelings, ideas that I'm avoiding in day-to-day life. And so what will happen on those pages is your inner critic will come up. Your dreams might come up. A reflection on an event or activity might come up. And I write them all out because the goal is when you're typing, when you're actually writing it out, there's a process that happens where we're connecting, right, our mind to our physical body, and we're processing it differently. And what we do when we're doing that, as you're thinking about, how do you start to generate that self-awareness, is it's hard to deny it when you can flip through pages and you can see the themes, right? And you'll notice that it'll come up time and time and time again. And that is a signal for us to say, okay, I need to work on this. Let me write this down. This is something that's coming up for me. I'm going to write it down. And taking that intentional step to do that is so, so key and important.
So yeah, to your point, it's like holding yourself accountable, because our minds can allow us to pull away and bring up excuses to not face what we were actually writing down in those moments. And then to your point, you get to go back and kind of look. And I feel like that's a very interesting thing to do. I feel like I want to try it out because you can slowly but surely maybe perhaps identify patterns within yourself and what you've done over time. And then you can, try and work out how you can improve yourself from doing that. It's interesting. I've always, gone outside in the morning and try to ground, and not really like I haven't meditated. I'm trying to get into that, but, just spending time with myself and just the earth, etc. But I haven't actually just tried to like write, and I'm not trying to incorporate that in the mornings to see how it can improve my life over time. One question I did want to ask you is, what was the moment you realized that burnout was a personal struggle and you wanted to help others overcome?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really great question. I think when I first realized I was burnt out, I did what most do, which is, you were saying, like, we look up, we look outside of ourselves for all of the reasons why. When I went on my journey, so I took a career break, and I basically took a 4-month career break. And during that time, we talked about, how do you infuse joy again? So I did a month of play, I did a month of pause, a month of plan, and then I did a month of pursue. So that was kind of my 4P framework. And it showed up actually earlier. The signs were there, Wade, like earlier than I thought they would be. So in play, what I recognized was, we went on a cruise, and I'd never been on a cruise before. And we missed dinner. They had these like set times for dinner at like 5:30, you got to be there. And my daughter was like losing her mind about something, and she would not go to dinner. And these dinners, right, for a kid are really long. It's like this full, like 5-course meal situation. And so she was not having it. And she did not want to go to dinner. And so we skipped dinner. And the next morning we showed up for breakfast, and the wait staff team said to us, "Oh, we missed you at dinner last night. We were waiting for you." And I had this pit in my stomach that felt just terrible of I had let them down, that I didn't show up for dinner and I let them down, and they were expecting us and they were ready for us. And, I went back after breakfast that day and I was just reflecting on it. I was journaling actually of why was this coming up for me? Why was I struggling with essentially strangers, letting down strangers? And what we needed as a family wasn't to not go to dinner that night, because we ended up, just grabbing some quick food and we just ended up like doing something else. But that's what we needed. And that's what my daughter needed. And honestly, I needed it, because the last thing I'd want is to force her to do something and have a terrible experience. So that was my first signal of, this is actually not them. This is me. That my own internal people pleasing, my lack of boundaries, my fear of letting someone down has been my habits for the last, 38 years. And I had continued to practice that for so long that it was second nature. That for me, that became my signal of, oh, this is a me issue that I need to work on.
And how can the younger generation of today understand how to implement those healthy, safe boundaries to respect their mental health and their time?
Yeah. I think a couple of things. I have so much appreciation for our Gen Z and, and our younger professionals, because I feel like the shift of setting boundaries and recognizing, no, I'm going to take care of my mental health right now, has exponentially grown as they've entered the workforce, right? Their demands for saying, I'm actually going to take more sick days because I'm not well, right? And I need to make sure I'm focusing on that. I think the difference that I'd love to see is, yes, we can take the time, but we have to take it intentionally. How are you using that time to work through those challenges? We can't sit on the couch and scroll TikTok for 8 hours as a mental health day. As a mental health day, we have to take more intentional time for us, whether that, to our point earlier, is doing something fun, infusing meditation, infusing self-reflection practices. And then, as I think about like the 4P framework, we start with joy, we have mindfulness practices, and then we set an intentional plan, right? I want us to look at, where are we going? Let's set goals for ourselves. Where are we going that aligns with who we are as individual people? And then let's go experiment, which is the concept of pursue. So if you have an idea, let's say you have an idea that you want to, open up your own business. And if you have this concept, or let's go with this one, you want to start a podcast, right? So you want to start a podcast like Wade. So you want to start a podcast. Well, let's think about, what does that look like for you? Let's set an intentional plan. Why are you creating the podcast? Who's your core audience for your podcast? Who are the people you need to connect with to be able to make this really quality content? And what do you personally want to gain from being engaged in this podcast? Because it's not going to stick if it doesn't align with what you want and what your values are. And then in pursue, how do you start that, right? So that could be reaching out to 10 people and scheduling weekly interviews with them, and then getting them edited, creating thumbnails once you got the 10, and then scheduling it out over 10 weeks. And while that is going out, go record another 5 more, and that you create a cycle. So like pursue is about experimentation. Does it work? Is it not working? What can I learn from it? Does this content resonate with people? Like, let's not give up on stuff before we give it time to breathe. And so, I think about it as, how can we help create structure around being thoughtful about what we want to do?
People don't look at implementing that structure in their life, right? They will go and say, I want to apply to this job. They apply to that job, but then they allow that journey to take them down that path, versus this is where I want to go. I'm looking at that plan of what I want to achieve. And then how can I sort of lay out that plan of attack to achieve what I ultimately want to achieve? And you did talk about, taking time intentionally. And I think a lot of folks don't do that, right? They focus on, I'm going to take the time, I need a break, and the break is then occupying their mental space with more stuff, right? Versus if you're a kettle on the stove, right? You're boiling water. That's us technically at work. And then the pressure boils up and up and up. And then you've got this loud whistle because it's trying to relieve that pressure in that container. And that is what I ultimately feel that humans need to do. They need to release sort of that pressure, but it's not by going to TikTok and scrolling on their time off. So could you talk a little bit more about maybe the ways in which people can be intentional with taking time off?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. So like what you're talking about, and I was guilty of this too. Like I'd plan a vacation and I'd plan like every minute of that vacation. Like it was like, we're going to Hawaii. Here's the 1,500 things we're doing this week. And we're gonna hit, all of the beaches, and we're snorkeling at all of these, and we've got time slots. Like you've got 30 minutes here. Okay. Like I I was so guilty of this. So a few things that I think are really helpful is we can take, right, these structured brains of ours. There's either the anti-structure or the hyper-structured people, right? This concept. Like we got to find a happy medium in this continuum. And so I talk a lot about time blocking. And I think it's helpful because what it does is it says, okay, especially people who are in a career break, or even if you think about a weekend, or like for me, even with work on a day-to-day basis, I'm time blocking when I'm working on things or when I'm working out or when I'm meditating. Because if it's on my calendar, it's tough for me to avoid it and deny it. Like it's there, so I might as well do it. So let's use an example of intentional time off. So let's say you've got a 4-day weekend, right, coming up, and you're trying to be thoughtful of, well, what do I want to do during this time? Well, the first thing we've got to structure is, well, what is your intention for that 4-day weekend? Is it to rest and recharge? Is it to work on a project? Like, what does that look like? Like, let's set the goal or the intention first. The next piece goes into, okay, well, let's structure in that 4-day weekend. What are you going to be doing for, let's say, 90-minute increments? Okay. So let's say, for example, I have a client actually that I'm working on a career break plan for her, and she is kind of structuring her time while she's in transition for another role. And what we're doing in that model is we're saying, okay, we're going to take the 4P framework. So play, pause, plan, and pursue. And we're going to time block that for you. So let's say, in that situation, for 90 minutes, what is going to bring you, what are ideas that you've avoided doing, activities that you've avoided doing that you need to find time for that's going to bring you joy? Now, for some people, that could be, I want to do disc, golf, or I want to go hiking, or I want to go to a beach, whatever that is, right? Like block your time of what that's going to look like and put it on the calendar of, this is what I'm going to do during this time slot. While you're there, there's also the component of, how do I think about being really mindful and present in that moment? So don't bring your phone. Like if you're going to the park, you're going hiking, like turn your phone on do not disturb and go on the hike. Instead of taking your phone, scrolling on it, even if it's listening to music, which I love listening to music, but there is a component of being truly present that you're taking all of your sensory sources in that allow you to do that. So my first one is like, time block it and put your phone away. Like do not disturb, keep it there so that you can be really thoughtful about that process. And the other piece, right, goes like, how do you structure each of those 4 Ps into your time window? So you have play, which is going to bring you joy. You have pause, which is, okay, you want to meditate twice a day. So in the morning, you might meditate for 10 minutes, and maybe before bed, you're going to do 10 minutes. You want to put the journaling practice, first thing in the morning. So you might meditate for 10 minutes. Maybe you journal for 15. So you got 25 minutes right there. And then you transition into whatever else you want to do that day. But time blocking it then on your calendar says, I'm going to do it during these slots. And then the next piece goes, okay, well, people often ask me, what are activities or things I can go to, right? That are going to help me be in pause. So some people have, and I would say most commonly struggle with being in pause at home. And the reason is because there's the TV that's distracting you, there's laundry you need to do, there's dishes you probably need to put away. It's really distracting. And so pause can also mean getting outside of your house, right? So that could be there's these there's like salt lounges that you can go to, or float takes that you can go to, or even like a sauna that you can go to, where you are by yourself in this container essentially, and it gives you this chance to really have some sensory, like true rest. So block that, put it on the calendar.
I think that point is extremely pertinent, is putting that on your calendar, and especially with those times where you come across the weekend, because I think more and more folks are trying to be intentional with, time blocking or setting time aside to complete activities during the week and their work day. But why would you let that fall away over the weekend? Because then we're like, wow, the weekend just went by so fast. Okay, but what were you doing, right? To your point, were you intentional with that time that you had over the weekend? Did you take time to yourself or spend it with family, et cetera? And I think there is so much noise this day and age, right? Especially with social media. And we think that spending time by ourselves, soaking in knowledge, yes, you're learning through social media. Well, you can, depending on content you consume. But even then, you're adding to the noise and the chaos that is just building up inside, instead of taking that time to decompress and kind of find those moments of solitude.
And there's the other piece that I want to bring up too. It's like, yes, the solitude is really important, but I also know that, loneliness is an epidemic as well globally for us. And that loneliness doesn't mean that like you can be right, like you can be with other people and still feel lonely, because you're not having the true authentic connection you're longing for. And so there is another piece to that as well of, yes, be thoughtful and intentional about, taking away the sensory challenges and being able to truly be alone in your space so that you're listening to your thoughts and what's coming up. But the other piece is trying to find communities that you can truly connect with and identify with, that are in person as well as in online, that you have kind of this place that gives you a bridge between, that is really key. When I first started sharing my journey on LinkedIn about burnout, like I think I got 3,000 messages in a matter of a week, just direct messages from people that were sharing their stories of their own personal burnout from all across the globe. And what I recognized was how lonely people felt in their struggles. And every single time I get on kind of that first client call, the first thing they say to me is, I've never told anyone this. And it breaks my heart, right? Because here you go, you feel so alone in this pain. But the other side to that is that says to me, when we're in burnout, you start to isolate yourself. And we have to also find ways to authentically connect with other humans. And part of that is finding people who are willing to talk about not only the nice, glossy, pretty things that are happening in the world, but also the raw emotion that comes with living life as humans.
We go through a lot of emotions, and there's a lot of stress points in our life, especially when you've got family life, corporate world, et cetera, and all of it can come together and just, pull people down. And I really love that you spoke on that, and your work is extremely impactful. And I really love what you do and how you help others. Where can people connect with you or engage with you if they looking to get your book or connect with you to talk about burnout or help with their sort of overall careers and lifestyle?
A couple things. My book comes out November 12th. It's called Career Break Compass, available for pre-order now, anywhere books are sold. So you can get it on Amazon or anywhere. And if you want to connect with me, there's probably two of the best places would be on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Laura Nguyen. There might be a few of us just because I have a very common last name. So you can also find me on my website, which is lauranguyen.co. So it's .co, and all my contact info is there as well. And you can reach out to me and we can schedule time to chat.
Awesome. And Laura, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom here with us today. I think a lot of individuals are going to be able to resonate with this information and take a lot of key elements away from it to help change their overall lives.
Thank you, Wade. It's been such a pleasure. Appreciate it.